Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Witches of East End, Season 1 and Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama takes place in the town of East End during a family dinner time when a woman named Joanna deliberately scratched her future son-in-law's arm, and while apologizing, she also managed to pull out some of his hair. Given her identity as their mother, both her daughter and son-in-law didn't dare say much in protest. Joanna then proceeded to the kitchen, where she placed the blood-stained dinner knife over the stove to heat it up, all the while chanting strange incantations. Seeing that the flames did not change color, she finally felt at ease. It turns out that Joanna is actually a 500-year-old witch. Immortality, her gift, was also her curse. Her two daughters were cursed as well. Her daughters could never live past the age of 30. They would always die young. After burying her daughters, the cycle would restart. Joanna's belly would suddenly appear to be 9 months pregnant, and she would once again raise her daughters, teaching them magic. However, they would always die young due to the magic. Joanna felt the pain of losing her loved ones over and over again. In her previous life, she watched her daughters burn to death. Determined to change things, this time she decided not to teach her daughters magic and to hide their innate talents. She wanted her daughters to live as normal humans. The daughters grew up, and the younger one, Freya, was soon to be married. This lifetime was the longest either daughter had lived. However, as time went on, the magic within them began to manifest. Today was Freya's engagement party, but her future mother-in-law didn't like her very much, often hinting that Freya was an uncultured child. Upset by the comments, Freya quietly wished that her mother-in-law would choke on her food, and shockingly, her words took effect. The mother-in-law choked on just a small bite of bread and nearly suffocated, only saved by the timely intervention of her son, Dash, who was a doctor. This incident left Freya stunned. She panicked and went to her sister Ingrid, confessing that she might possess some sort of magical power. Ingrid, however, insisted it was just a coincidence. Just then, a smelly man walked in through the door, causing Freya to panic even more. It turned out he was the man who had been appearing in her dreams recently. Somehow, they seemed to be connected. As they got lost in each other's gaze, Freya followed the man upstairs. After talking, she learned that he was Killian, her fiancé's brother. Their intense eye contact sparked an immediate connection, and they fell into a passionate tongue massage. But soon, Freya came to her senses, pushed the smelly man away, and hurriedly fled. Meanwhile, Ingrid was inside the house when she stumbled upon an ancient photograph. Strikingly, the person in the photo bore an uncanny resemblance to herself. As she pondered this mystery, the picture frame suddenly cracked, and the old photograph began to fade slowly until it completely vanished. This bizarre event seemed to mirror the creeping approach of a crisis they were yet to fully comprehend. That very evening, Joanna, who was supposed to attend the engagement party, was found in the garden, drawing mysterious runes with a stick. A neighbor couple approached to say hello but received no response. As they turned to leave, Joanna suddenly appeared in front of them and mercilessly killed the man. However, this was not really Joanna, but an imposter who had transformed to look like her, aiming to frame her for the crime. Unbeknownst to the real Joanna, her enemy had already drawn close. The next day, a cat arrived in town and was hit by a car as it crossed the road. When the greasy driver got out to check, the cat had shockingly transformed into a sexy woman. The driver, quite alarmed, kept explaining to the police that she had hit a cat, not understanding how it had turned into a woman. The woman was already dead and was placed in a body bag and taken to the morgue. After the staff had left, the deceased woman mysteriously came back to life, grabbed some clothes to wrap her sexy body, and left the hospital. Later, the woman appeared at Joanna's doorstep. It turned out she was Wendy, Joanna's sister, who possessed the unique ability to transform into a cat and had 9 lives. She had just lost one of her lives. Joanna was surprised to see her sister, as it had been over 100 years since their last encounter. Wendy had come because she sensed that Joanna was about to face a significant crisis. Although Joanna was immortal due to the curse, she could still be killed through certain special means. Wendy, sensing the danger, conducted a tarot reading for her sister. The cards indicated that an imposter would ruin everything for her. Skeptical, Joanna took the tarot cards to read for herself. However, as she flipped the cards, they showed the same results as before, even after several retries. Joanna finally accepted the reality. Recently, the only new people Joanna had been in contact with were her younger daughter Freya's fiancé and his family. Previously, she had tested Dash with witchcraft, and his blood had shown he was just an ordinary person. The identity of the enemy remained unknown. Therefore, Wendy decided to stay for a while, and Joanna warned her not to use magic in front of her daughters. While Wendy didn't understand her sister's caution, she agreed to comply. The sudden appearance of their aunt took the sisters by surprise. However, the next day, when everyone had left the house, the imposter transformed into Joanna again, entered their home, and stood before an ink painting depicting a desert landscape. The imposter then recited a spell, and the man in the painting began to move slowly until he finally sprung out of the canvas, his skin sunburned red. The imposter handed him a glass of water, which he eagerly drank. She then told the man that she could help him seek revenge, and that he was free to do as he pleased. The man grinned maliciously and went to the bar where Freya was. He followed her to the restroom, probably wanting to peep at her. It turns out this man was Freya's obsessive suitor from 100 years ago. Due to his madness, Freya had sealed him in the desert for 100 years. The stalking man learned from the imposter that the two sisters could be reborn infinitely. However, if he could pull her into the painting and kill her there, she would not be able to reincarnate. Freya, unable to use magic in this life, was forced to recite the spell he told her, opening a portal in the painting on the wall. The stalking man then dragged Freya's heavy body into the painting. Meanwhile, the imposter continued to lurk in their home. She took advantage of Wendy's distraction, stabbing her in the abdomen from behind. By the time Joanna and Ingrid returned, Wendy was barely alive. With her last breath, she urged Joanna to save her daughter Freya. Then she transformed into a black cat. Ingrid, witnessing this, could hardly believe her eyes. Before Joanna could explain, the police arrived at their home. It turned out that a surviving neighbor from a previous incident involving the imposter had accused Joanna of being the murderer. The police were on the way to take her away. In an emergency, Joanna told Ingrid that she had always possessed magical abilities and directed her to a secret compartment behind the cupboard, which contained items that could help her. Following her mother's instructions, Ingrid found a large box containing a magic book. While browsing the magic book, she discovered a spell called the Resurrection Charm. Thinking of her recently deceased aunt, she followed the steps in the magic book and set up the corresponding formation. The next second, her dead aunt was indeed resurrected. However, the resurrected Wendy complained to Ingrid that she shouldn't have resurrected her. Resurrecting someone comes at a steep price. The life of another loved one would be taken in exchange. Since Aunt Wendy already had the ability to resurrect, Ingrid's actions were not only redundant, but also endangered the lives of those around her. But now, the priority was to rescue her sister Freya from the stalking man in the painting. Meanwhile, Freya was dragged into the painting and tied up. She ignited the world within the painting and used a magical iron hook to prepare an escape route. As the flames began to spread, Freya's magical powers were suddenly activated. She broke free from her bonds, grabbed a statue, and knocked the stalking man unconscious from behind. In the nick of time, she escaped from the painting. When Ingrid and Wendy arrived at the bar, they just happened to see Freya making her escape. The sisters were still struggling to come to terms with the night's events. At that moment, Ingrid received a call from their mother's lawyer, instructing them to gather $1 million for their mother's bail, reassuring them that the money was with their great-aunt. But the sisters remembered that their great-aunt had passed away in their childhood. They had often visited her grave. Wendy quickly understood what was needed and took a shovel to the cemetery. When they opened the buried box, they found it unbelievably full of money, which they used to successfully bail Joanna out. However, to their surprise, the stalking man had not perished in the burning painting. The moment the portal closed, he endured the burning pain and escaped from the painting. Unwilling to give up, he sneaked back into their home. While Freya was running a naked bath, he appeared behind her, pushed her into the water, and began chanting a spell to seal her away. But he was unaware that their mother had already been bailed out. Joanna appeared just in time to stop him and used witchcraft to seal him back into the painting. This time, they didn't hang the painting on the wall, they buried it in the ground, temporarily dealing with the threat of the stalker. Yet, they still hadn't identified the real identity of the imposter of Joanna. The two daughters expressed their desire to help their mother uncover the mastermind behind the events. However, Joanna was reluctant to expose them to magic, and even threw the magic book into the fire to deter them. But Wendy believed the sisters should learn to use magic. She secretly began teaching them, explaining that each witch has unique talents. Freya could deeply perceive people's desires, allowing her to concoct various magical potions, while Ingrid possessed extraordinary intelligence, enabling her to invent new spells. According to Wendy, their mother was a genius in every aspect. If she put her mind to it, there was nothing she couldn't achieve. Wendy then demonstrated her magic by making pebbles float in the air, which the sisters then practiced. However, Freya was clearly out of sorts and only managed to sink the floating pebbles into the water. Ingrid showed more promise, managing to magically lift fish out of the water in just 2.5 minutes, which impressed Wendy. In reality, Joanna had not completely destroyed the magic book. She collected the ashes, placed them in a box, and chanted a restoration spell. In that way, the magic book was restored to its pristine condition. However, a pressing issue was for them to identify the recent imposter who wanted to harm them. Over centuries, the number of Joanna's enemies was too numerous to count. She pored over old diaries, eliminating potential foes one by one, recalling all her past deeds, yet she still couldn't figure out the identity of the imposter. She thought she had eliminated all those who once wanted to harm her and her family. Evening was fast approaching when Joanna, clueless about what to do next, decided to start cooking dinner while waiting for her daughters to return home. However, just as she turned around, the imposter suddenly appeared behind her. Instinctively, she cast a spell that sent her flying like a Barbie toy, but the imposter was not easily deterred and retaliated with a similar spell. Just then, Freya arrived home and witnessed the scene. Joanna shouted at her daughter to allow her to use magic. Watching this, Freya glanced at a dinner knife, muttered a spell, and the knife flew straight towards the imposter. Prepared for this, the imposter used witchcraft to transform into a wisp of smoke and escaped for shitty life. After this incident, Joanna finally realized that she should not suppress her daughter's talents. She retrieved the magic book and encouraged the sisters to learn magic. To prevent the imposter from breaking into their home again, Joanna, together with her family, cast a protective spell around the house, ensuring the imposter could no longer enter at will. Meanwhile, Ingrid was constantly worried about the consequences of a resurrection spell she had used recently. She was desperate to find a way to reverse it so that no one would have to die as a result. However, Wendy had told her that it was a balance that could not be broken. Still not giving up, Ingrid found a reversal spell in an ancient book and set up the ritual behind her family's back. But when she finished chanting the spell, instead of reversing the resurrection, her hands suddenly became ice cold and her blood began to freeze. Even her body was slowly losing sensation. Hearing her cries for help, Wendy found her and used a counterspell to gradually restore her frozen hands to normalcy. It was then that Ingrid finally accepted the irreversible nature of the situation. Because of the resurrection spell, which required a life in exchange, Ingrid even feared accepting a confession from the man she liked. She was afraid that falling in love with him would cause irreversible harm, so she decisively rejected his confession. That same evening, she sought comfort from her best friend. However, her friend, who was 7 months pregnant, suddenly began experiencing severe pain. Ingrid rushed her to the hospital, where the doctor informed her that the pregnant woman was bleeding heavily and required immediate surgery, with the possibility of losing the baby. Heartbroken, Ingrid blamed herself, thinking she had caused all this. Her boyfriend also heard the news and came to the hospital to comfort her. With his support, she managed to stabilize her emotions. Just then, her phone rang with news from the hospital that the surgery had been a great success, and both her friend and the baby were safe. However, just as she was processing this information, her boyfriend suddenly started bleeding from his nose and collapsed, dying shortly thereafter. This sudden tragedy left Ingrid struggling to accept the reality. The next day, Wendy came to remind Ingrid that it was Ingrid's boyfriend's funeral. She offered to accompany her, but Ingrid said she didn't want to attend. Thinking Ingrid hadn't come to terms with her boyfriend's death, Wendy didn't press further. However, as soon as Ingrid closed her bedroom door, her boyfriend's spirit appeared in her room. Unable to accept his departure, she had found a spell to summon spirits in a magic book. At that moment, her boyfriend was just a soul, and he didn't believe he was dead until Ingrid took him to see the funeral his family was holding for him. Seeing that no one else could see him, he finally accepted the truth. He deeply loved Ingrid. Even after she revealed that his death was the price for the resurrection spell, he didn't blame her. He didn't want her to feel guilty. Unexpectedly, her use of the soul summoning spell had also allowed another ghost to return to the mortal world. Meanwhile, Freya was at a bar when she met a strange woman who claimed to be Dash's ex-girlfriend. After saying this, the blonde woman turned and left. Freya tried to follow to get clarification, but was stopped by Dash's brother Killian, who asked why she was shouting at thin air. Freya explained she was talking to the blonde woman, but Killian thought she was joking. It turned out the blonde had died years ago. How could she possibly have spoken with her? Realizing something was amiss, Freya returned home and shared what had happened with Wendy. Wendy was puzzled because ghosts shouldn't be able to cross into the real world on their own. After some thought, Wendy had a sudden realization. They rushed into Ingrid's room and indeed saw her boyfriend's spirit there. After hearing Wendy's explanation, Ingrid realized her mistake. Wendy continued, explaining that keeping a spirit in the mortal world was unwise. The boyfriend was now a ghost, and there could be no future for them. She had to send him back that night, or he would never be able to return and would become a wandering ghost. This left Ingrid deep in thought. At the same time, worried that the blonde ghost might haunt her fiancé, Dash, Freya hurried to the hospital. Sure enough, she saw the blonde there, but Dash, unable to see the ghost, was unaware of what was happening. Unexpectedly, the blonde was not there to take Dash away. She had actually come for his brother Killian. After revealing this, the blonde disappeared once more. Freya then called Wendy, who informed her that while ghosts couldn't touch food, they could affect electricity and potentially control electric currents to harm people. Hearing this, Freya returned to Killian's bar. Despite finding the blonde, she couldn't persuade her. The blonde placed her hand on the fuse box, and the next moment, all the lights in the bar exploded. Just then, Killian walked in and was immediately electrocuted by the power switch. Freya quickly took him to the hospital, and fortunately, everything turned out all right with Dash's timely emergency response, and Killian showed signs of life. Afterward, Freya found the blonde again. This time, there was a change. Having seen Killian nearly die had deeply pained her. Eventually, the blonde accepted Freya's suggestion to let her help send her back to the underworld. Meanwhile, Ingrid was also saying her final farewell to her boyfriend's soul. They arranged petals in a pattern and recited the corresponding spells. As their bodies emitted a golden light, the two spirits finally returned to their own world. But soon after, another strange event occurred. The next morning, Dash's mother suddenly visited Ingrid and showed her an old photograph. The photograph depicted Ingrid from 200 years ago and a little girl. To avoid revealing her identity as a witch, Ingrid could only claim that it might be a photo left by her ancestors. However, once she returned home, Ingrid grew curious about her past life. When she asked her mother and aunt, they were evasive, seemingly hiding something. The more they avoided the topic, the more curious Ingrid became. Determined to understand what had happened in that past life, she secretly found a spell in a magic book that could restore her past life memories and crafted it into a chocolate. When she ate the chocolate, memories of her past life flooded her mind. In that lifetime, Ingrid had fallen in love with Archibald, a powerful wizard who practiced dark magic. Joanna and Wendy knew very well that he was a devilish figure. Blinded by love, Ingrid had even helped Archibald steal materials for black magic from her mother. Archibald then used black magic to swindle money from others. One day, an elderly woman came to Archibald and offered all her possessions in exchange for a spell to make her young again. After taking her money, they had the old woman drink a potion they had prepared. Then, Ingrid and Archibald chanted a spell and the woman let out a painful chicken scream. When the witchcraft was complete, the old woman had transformed into a young girl, a change that excited her greatly. However, Ingrid was unaware that black magic could not truly help others. Archibald's assistance in making the old woman young was merely a ploy to steal her wealth. The moment the rejuvenated woman stepped outside, she suddenly dropped dead, a price paid for using black magic. While they were preparing to dispose of the woman's body, her brother arrived, inquiring about his sister's whereabouts. Knowing Archibald's nefarious activities, he threatened to expose them if they did not reveal his sister's location. Without a choice, Archibald mercilessly killed him. Despite this, Ingrid remained unenlightened. Even though Archibald had a daughter, Ingrid was resolute in her decision to elope with him. As she was packing her belongings at home, her aunt discovered her and tried to convince her that Archibald was merely using her. Wendy had rejected Archibald's advances in the past, but Ingrid refused to heed Wendy's advice and was determined to leave with Archibald. When Archibald arrived and saw Wendy trying to stop Ingrid, he did not hesitate to attack her. Wendy was pinned against the wall, and Archibald even demanded Ingrid kill her aunt, threatening to do it himself otherwise. During their conversation, Wendy conjured magic in her hands and launched it at Archibald. However, Ingrid stepped in front of him, and thus, she was struck by Wendy's magic, falling down the stairs and dying instantly. Ingrid, having regained her past life's memories, suddenly awoke from her sleep in disbelief. She couldn't fathom that in her past life it was her aunt who had inadvertently caused her death. Curious, she approached her mother to learn what had happened afterward. Upon seeing her daughter recall her past life's memories, her mother finally revealed the truth. When Joanna had returned home back then, she found only Ingrid's lifeless body. Enraged, Archibald had throttled Wendy, ready to kill her as revenge for Ingrid. In a critical moment, Joanna grabbed a knife to save her sister, but was intercepted by Archibald's daughter. In the struggle, Joanna accidentally slashed the little girl's back. Following this, Joanna recited a spell and plunged the dagger into Archibald, who instantly disintegrated into ashes. Joanna then comforted the injured girl and healed her wounds with magic. However, the death of Ingrid deeply saddened Joanna. Wendy, feeling guilty, apologized, insisting it was an accident. Joanna knew the curse all too well. With Ingrid's death, her younger daughter Freya would soon follow. Overwhelmed by the grief of losing her daughter, Joanna lost her rationality. She felt that if Wendy had discovered Ingrid and Archibald's scheme earlier and informed her, perhaps they could have prevented Ingrid from making fatal choices. This led Joanna to sever ties with her sister for over a century, until a month ago when Wendy, foreseeing Joanna's calamity, reappeared at their doorstep. Archibald's daughter, having been cursed with a tracking spell, died 60 years later, concluding the feud between their families. However, unbeknownst to them, the little girl had not died but had become the mother of Dash, Freya's boyfriend. One day, while Dash's mother embraced Freya, the scar on her back was still visible, and it was revealed she was the one who was impersonating Joanna to commit the crimes, all to exact revenge and fulfill her father Archibald's wishes. That night, she transformed into Joanna again and went to a grave where she spread a concocted magic potion. A hand suddenly emerged from the earth, and the once dead Ingrid miraculously revived. Controlled by Dash's mother, the zombie Ingrid was sent to locate an item called the Golden Snake. However, to not alert anyone, she secretly approached Wendy, posing as Ingrid of this life, to extract information about the Golden Snake. Wendy quickly realized something was amiss because she had never mentioned such an item in their presence. When the ruse was up, the zombie Ingrid knocked Wendy unconscious and used a magic circle to restrain her powers. She threatened Wendy to reveal the whereabouts of the Golden Snake or face death. Wendy, however, informed her that the Golden Snake key had been destroyed centuries ago. Meanwhile, Joanna, realizing her sister was missing, used a tracking spell to locate Wendy. Arriving just in time, she witnessed the zombie Ingrid fatally injuring Wendy. Instantly recognizing that this Ingrid was resurrected through dark magic, Joanna eradicated her without hesitation. Fortunately, Wendy had 9 lives and would soon revive. After her revival, Wendy shared the imposter's interrogation about the Golden Snake key with Joanna, who confirmed that she had destroyed the key centuries ago. Despite this, Joanna felt uneasy upon noticing Wendy's green necklace had turned red, indicating she was down to her last life. In the dead of night, Joanna ventured into the backyard and unearthed a box buried underground. Contrary to what she had led everyone to believe, she had not destroyed the key, but had hidden it instead. Seeing that the key was still intact, she finally felt at ease. However, she knew she couldn't keep this secret from her sister any longer. So the next day, she took out the key and came clean to Wendy. The sight of the Golden Snake key took Wendy by surprise, and she struggled to accept Joanna's actions. It turned out that this key could unlock a portal to Asgard, a magical realm where witches come from, and their family had originally escaped through this portal to the real world. Moreover, the key possessed powerful magic, capable of controlling human thoughts. Joanna had kept the key because she hoped to see her son again. They had fled to this world to escape danger, but had left her son behind in Asgard for some reasons. Wendy warned Joanna that the key was extremely dangerous and must be destroyed immediately. However, Joanna ignored her advice, determined to keep it. She claimed she would not use it, wanting only to maintain a connection with her homeland. Their discussion ended on a sour note. As Wendy turned to leave, she felt compelled by the key to open the box and looked into the eyes of the Golden Snake. Just as she was about to touch it, the snake came to life, biting her hand and coiling around it. Hearing the noise, Joanna rushed over but still scolded her for looking into the snake's eyes. However, the Golden Snake was a powerful evil object, and ordinary spells had no effect on it. Joanna then went to fetch a spell book to find a way to remove it. But by then, the snake had released its toxin, and Wendy's eyes began to change, showing signs of being controlled by the snake. When Joanna finally found the method to unlock the key, Wendy insisted on leaving to open the portal and return home. Realizing that Wendy was under the snake's control, Joanna used a spell to seal the house, preventing Wendy from leaving. The toxin caused Wendy to become increasingly aggressive. She lunged at Joanna, even attempting to kill her own sister. Although Wendy was stronger than Joanna, the only way to free her from the snake's influence was to destroy it. This left Joanna in a dilemma. The longer the snake possessed Wendy, the more likely she was to turn completely evil. Finally, Joanna resolved to act. She enchanted a pair of scissors, and while Wendy was momentarily distracted, she pinned her hand to the box with a dagger. Then she swiftly took out the scissors and cut the golden snake to pieces, freeing Wendy from its control. After her sister returned to normal, Joanna bandaged her wounds. Both apologized to each other, mending their relationship after the frightening ordeal. Just then, Freya returned home with startling news. She revealed that her magical powers had mysteriously vanished due to a plot orchestrated by Dash's mother. That morning, Dash's mother had cursed a bouquet of roses with black magic and had them delivered to Freya by a courier. As soon as Freya touched the flowers, she was bewitched by Dash's mother's sorcery, leaving her extremely exhausted and seemingly ill. Seizing the opportunity, Dash's mother took her back to her own home. By the time Freya fell into a deep unconsciousness, Dash's mother had already drunk a potion she had prepared earlier and proceeded to drain Freya's magical powers. Her eyes glowed red, indicating a significant enhancement in her own magical strength. When Freya awoke, she initially thought she had simply fallen asleep from exhaustion. It was only when she tried to use magic to light a fire that she realized her powers had disappeared. Joanna and Wendy quickly concluded that the imposter must be responsible, but the identity of the imposter remained a mystery. Their priority was to restore Freya's powers, but despite their efforts, nothing worked. Wendy suggested that perhaps only Freya's father, Victor, could help. It turned out that their father was a wizard doctor who had parted ways with Joanna centuries ago due to a disagreement, severing their contact completely. However, this crisis forced them to seek his help. Victor, upon learning of Freya's plight, readily agreed to assist. However, restoring her powers was a dangerous task. The pain from the spell could potentially endanger Freya's life, but they had no other option. Victor cut the palms of his and their hands, intending to transfuse blood in an attempt to forcefully reshape Freya's magic. However, the process was excruciating, and Freya screamed in agony. Unable to bear her daughter's pain, Joanna stopped Victor's spellcasting. Freya, realizing that the magic reshaping had failed, left in anger. Victor's return and the sight of his wife and daughter filled him with renewed hope for his family. He was willing to face the upcoming crisis with them. In a few days, it would be Freya's wedding with Dash, and she hoped her father would attend. What they didn't know was that Dash's mother, who had stolen Freya's powers, had already found a way to kill Joanna and had created the deadliest poison in history. Meanwhile, Ingrid encountered a peculiar man who claimed he had been searching for a place called Asgard. According to ancient texts, he knew witches existed in this world. By coincidence, he saw Ingrid break a harasser's fingers with witchcraft, convincing him that she was the witch he was seeking. He even found Ingrid's name in his ancestor's diary, claiming she was the key to opening a portal to Asgard. Ingrid, unwilling to reveal her witch identity, denied knowing what he was talking about. Frustrated by her refusal to help, the man took an axe and chopped his own thigh, believing that Ingrid wouldn't let him die as a witch. To force her to use her witchcraft, he coerced her into healing his wound. Although Ingrid understood the importance of the portal, she made it clear that she would not help him open it. However, the man was not easily deterred. He took a handgun, preparing to cause a scene at Freya's wedding. Meanwhile, Freya, who was preparing to marry Dash, encountered a problem. The day before their wedding, Killian sought her out and confessed his love for her, pleading with her not to marry his brother. This left Freya in a dilemma. Her mother had once read her fortune using tarot cards, predicting that her love life would face a crucial choice between her adversary and her soulmate. Initially, Freya was convinced that Dash was her soulmate, but she couldn't deny her inexplicable feelings for Killian. When her father learned about her predicament, Victor decided to reveal their encounters in past lives. In a previous life, she had fallen in love with a man who looked exactly like Killian. After hearing her father's story, Freya confronted her true feelings. She went to Dash and called off their wedding. Just as Freya was about to pursue Killian, Dash's mother made her move. She disguised herself as Wendy and lured Joanna into their home's basement. When Joanna was distracted, she stunned her with an electric shock from behind. When Joanna awoke, Dash's mother used a formation to imprison her magic. She prepared to use the deadliest magical poison to kill Joanna, confessing that she was the daughter of her former lover Archibald from their past. This confused Joanna, who had tested Dash earlier and found him devoid of any magic. It turned out that when Dash was very young, his mother had usurped all the magic of Dash and Killian for her own use, giving her enough power to seek revenge. She then injected Joanna with the deadly poison, which suppressed her magic and made her mortal. At the critical moment, Wendy appeared and immediately engaged in a struggle with Dash's mother. Using her magic, Wendy created a gap in the formation that bound Joanna, allowing her to break free. Eventually, the sisters worked together to push Dash's mother into a furnace. With her death, the magic of Freya and her two sons was fully restored. Meanwhile, Dash, furious about the broken engagement, confronted his brother but was unaware that he now possessed magic. His uncontrollable emotions caused his magic to erupt, accidentally killing Killian. To cover everything up, he pushed Killian's Tesla boat out to sea. They thought all threats were eliminated, but the strange man who had been seeking the entrance to Asgard took Ingrid hostage. He took her to the entrance of Asgard, convinced that his ancestors were correct and that Ingrid was the second key to opening it. As she touched the wall, it began to crumble, releasing a blinding light that incinerated the man instantly, while a figure emerged from the ruins. The scene shifts to the entire witch family gathering together, preparing for Freya to cast spells for everyone. The trio drank a potion they had mixed earlier, and then Freya began reciting the incantation. Suddenly, a third eye appeared on each of their foreheads. At that moment, memories of events from the past few days flooded into their minds. It turned out that a few days earlier, Ingrid had opened the gateway to Asgard, a magical realm where witches come from. A shadowy figure emerged from the portal, but after being exposed to a blinding light, they woke up the next day with no memory of that day's events. Fortunately, Freya wasn't there at the time, so she took on the task of restoring their memories with her magic. Even though their memories returned, they still couldn't see clearly who the shadowy figure was. After regaining her memories, Joanna immediately wanted to track down this mysterious person. However, as she stood up, she was struck by an intense headache and suddenly began bleeding from her nose, fainting immediately afterward. It was revealed that Joanna had been injected with a potent poison by Dash's mother, weakening her body severely. The poison had penetrated deep into her bones, proliferating like cancer cells. She didn't have much longer to live. Despite being a powerful witch, she now found herself in such a pitiful state, which was devastating to her. To keep her daughters from worrying, she had her husband conceal her illness from them. Joanna had given up on treatment, but Victor, a wizard and a doctor, hadn't. He discovered a plant growing along the Amazon River that might neutralize the toxins in her body. Despite the slim chance of success, he decided to try it. After Victor left, Joanna looked through some old belongings, sharing with her sister the hardships of her life. She thought death might be the best outcome for her, hoping her daughters could lead normal lives. Perhaps after her death, the curse affecting them would be lifted, allowing her daughters to live long lives. Wendy insisted she wouldn't let her die, to which Joanna responded that it's going to happen. As the two sisters cried like two giant babies, a knock suddenly came at the door. When Wendy opened it, they were shocked to see a man standing there. It was Joanna's son, Fred. They brought him inside and learned that he had also arrived in this world when Asgard Gateway was opened a week earlier, and he too had lost his memory for a while. Fred was overjoyed to see his mother again, expressing his long-standing desire to reunite with them. Seeing his sincere demeanor, Joanna embraced him, letting go of the past. However, Wendy was suspicious of Fred's intentions, pulling Joanna aside to warn her not to trust him, reminding her of a past betrayal that they should not overlook. Yet Joanna believed that after so much time, her son must have changed significantly. Indeed, Wendy's suspicion of Fred stemmed from a war that had occurred 400 years earlier. Years ago, Joanna rebelled against her father's tyranny, but her defiance led to her being expelled from Asgard. Everyone gathered at the boundary between Asgard and the real world, waiting for Joanna and Fred. Joanna emerged from the portal, but Fred was nowhere to be seen. During their escape, she had become separated from her son. Joanna had obtained the Golden Snake Key, which could close the portal and prevent her father, the King of Asgard, from following them. However, she refused to leave without her son, insisting they wait for Fred to appear so they could all leave together. Just then, the portal lit up again and Fred burst out. Seeing everyone assembled, Fred urgently asked his mother for the Golden Snake Key to seal the portal. But when Fred received the key, he threw it into the portal, revealing his betrayal. At that moment, the king emerged from the portal, extinguishing any hope of escape and preparing them to face death. However, the king believed that death was too lenient a punishment. He cursed them all to eternal life, doomed to experience sorrow, fear, and pain. This curse was the origin of their suffering. As the king prepared to leave with Fred, Joanna picked up a sword and severed her father's arm holding the Golden Snake Key. Wendy then used the key to close the portal permanently. The betrayal left a lasting impression on Wendy, making her wary of trusting Fred again. Fred also emerged, suddenly noticing something unusual about his mother's condition. When he touched her head, he immediately identified the deadly poison inside her. He warmed his hands and astonishingly drew the poison out of her body, curing her. Joanna, however, was initially furious when the poison transferred into Fred, but he reassured her that the poison was ineffective against him. He had endured its effects for a century, as the king had repeatedly tried to poison him. His body had developed antibodies, and he would only feel weak for a day or two. After Fred was sent to rest, Joanna's trust in him grew, and even Wendy's attitude softened slightly, although she still advised caution. Joanna didn't respond, unaware that their conversation downstairs was overheard by Fred upstairs. Since Fred's arrival in their world, the East End town had experienced a series of strange events. Residents were attacked, bearing mysterious runes on their bodies. The oddities didn't stop there. Ingrid had developed a sleepwalking issue. Recently, she found herself in the wilderness at night, encountering a bizarre creature with strange GPS tentacles, with no memory of the events the next day. Meanwhile, Wendy recently met an attractive police officer and seemed to be starting a new romance. One day, in her cat form, she stealthily approached the officer's house. He seemed to adore the cat, gently stroking it and going inside to fetch some treats. Wendy, happy, jumped onto the windowsill, but was shocked to discover that the officer had a family, which infuriated her. She left immediately, and by the time the officer returned with the food, the cat had already gone. The next day, when they met again, Wendy disdainfully called him a jerk, accusing him of not being honest about his marital status. After hearing this, the officer realized the misunderstanding and explained that he was divorced. His ex-wife had just brought their daughter over the previous day for him to look after. The misunderstanding cleared. Wendy smiled happily, and their sweet but smelly romance began. At the corner of the park just now, a man was suddenly dragged into the bushes by a dark shadow. When he emerged from the woods, he was covered in wounds and screaming in a chicken voice before collapsing to the ground. As people gathered around, they noticed strange runes etched on his body. The officer quickly secured the scene. From the officer, Wendy learned that similar incidents had occurred in recent days. This worried her greatly, leading her to suspect that Fred might be involved. She told her sister what she had learned today. The series of strange events made Joanna suspect her son as well. This morning, Joanna approached Fred, who was asleep, and discovered a strange rune on his body. She then texted Wendy to step outside and shared what she had seen. It turned out that this strange rune represents the king's mark and symbolizes eternal loyalty to the king. To confirm whether the recent murders were related to Fred, Wendy went to the hospital morgue and used witchcraft to temporarily awaken the dead man. She wanted to find out who had attacked him. However, the man spoke incoherently upon waking and did not reveal the attacker. Frustrated, Wendy had to let him go, but she wasn't entirely without findings. She discovered the king's mark etched on the man's body and promptly sent a photo to Joanna. When Wendy returned, they decided to investigate further. She brought out a magical device. She had applied a potion to Fred's clothes beforehand. By activating it with magic, they could see Fred's movements and even track him. They indeed saw Fred's apparition in the kitchen, taking a knife and then exiting the house. They followed the apparition into the forest and saw Fred holding a pigeon and chanting spells as if performing a ritual. Suddenly, Fred turned around and they quickly hid. Looking again, Fred had disappeared. Back home, Wendy confronted Fred about why he was killing people in the East End town and what he was doing in the forest. Fred claimed he didn't know who was killing the town's people and that he was using a purification spell in the forest to remove the king's mark, knowing his mother had seen it on him. His mother's expression when she walked away earlier had upset him, so he wanted to remove the mark. Despite this, Wendy demanded an explanation for the murdered townspeople. Fred explained that his grandfather, the king of Asgard, had a loyal army that tracked him and would naturally send someone after him. Wendy thought he was making excuses, but ultimately Joanna chose to believe Fred's explanation. Meanwhile, ever since Dash's uncontrolled magic killed his brother, he had been trying to use his abilities again, but had failed to do so. Today, another victim was brought into the hospital, and as a doctor, Dash was responsible for resuscitating the patient. Suddenly, the patient's heart stopped. As he prepared to start CPR and touch the patient's chest, a strong electric shock emanated from his palms, killing the patient instantly. After this incident, he was certain something had changed in his body. He then conducted an exam on himself. When the results came back, even the examining doctor was shocked. The MRI showed significant changes in his brain structure, and comparing it with hospital scans from the last 20 years, there was one person who had the exact same condition as him 20 years ago, a little girl named Ingrid, whose brain structure was completely different from that of a normal person. Hearing this name, Dash fell into deep thought. The next day, Dash sought out Ingrid to inquire if she had experienced any unusual symptoms. However, Ingrid didn't reveal her identity as a witch, even though she knew that Dash, like her family, hailed from the realm of Asgard. Disappointed without any answers, Dash left. Back home, Ingrid shared with her sister Freya that Dash seemed uncertain about his powers. Yet, Freya believed that since she had abandoned him at their wedding and their mother had killed Dash's mother, he must deeply resent their family. She advised Ingrid not to get involved with Dash's affairs. Despite this, Ingrid felt they should guide him in harnessing his internal powers, otherwise he might lose control and harm others. That evening, Ingrid approached Dash again and disclosed that he was a warlock. Just as Ingrid was about to explain further, Dash's phone rang. A mysterious person had arrived at his doorstep, requesting a meeting. Asking Ingrid to wait upstairs, Dash went down only to discover the man was someone who had blackmailed him recently. The man had previously obtained surveillance footage of Dash accidentally killing his brother and had threatened to expose Dash as a murderer unless he paid $100,000. Although Dash had already paid him, the man's greed was insatiable, and now he was demanding $100,000 a month. Enraged, Dash was ready to kill him, but the man was prepared and pulled out a handgun. As he pointed it at Ingrid, who had just come downstairs, Dash used his magic to knock the gun from the man's hand, grabbed him by the collar, and threw him to the ground. Dash unleashed his electric powers, repeatedly striking the man until Ingrid's shouts brought him back to his senses. By then, the man was already breathless. When Ingrid asked why the man was there, Dash feigned panic and lied that he didn't know the man, who had burst in unexpectedly, and he thought the man was going to shoot Ingrid, which caused him to lose control. His act convinced Ingrid that he had killed the man by accident while trying to protect her. She promised to help him and teach him to control his magic. They then disposed of the body in the lake, and Ingrid cast a spell with a wooden doll to ensure no one would discover the corpse. In reality, Dash's brother Killian wasn't dead. He had been rescued at sea by a witch named Eva, who nursed him back to health, probably using her muscles rather than witchcraft. Although he had lost his memory of the day he was attacked, under Eva's guidance, he soon discovered his innate talent for witchcraft. In just a few days, Killian fell in love with Eva, and they married for their hormone yoga session. On the other side, Freya was looking into the mirror when suddenly, images of Killian flooded her mind. She saw Killian, battered and nearly dead. Snapping back to reality, Freya realized the gravity of the situation and sought help from her aunt. Wendy used tarot cards for divination, which confirmed Killian's severe injuries, but a mysterious force shielded him, making it impossible for her to see his current condition or pinpoint his location. However, they weren't completely out of options. Since Freya and her twin brother Fred shared a unique connection, they could locate anyone by chanting a spell together while holding hands. With Fred's assistance, Freya managed to pinpoint Killian's exact location. Determined, Freya traveled thousands of miles to the city and knocked on the door, only to be greeted by Killian's wife, Eva. After a brief introduction by Killian, Freya was caught off guard by the news of Killian's marriage. Instead of confessing her feelings, she informed him about his mother's death. Subsequently, Killian returned with Eva and Freya to the East End. When Dash learned his brother wasn't dead, he was initially shocked and then worried. But knowing that Killian had forgotten the magic Dash used that injured him on that day, Dash finally felt relieved. The next day, a lawyer came to Dash's home, explaining that their mother's will required both sons to be present to be read. After handing over the items, the lawyer left. Upon opening the box, they discovered an ancient cipher box. Curious, Killian tried to open it, and as they both touched it, the box emitted a blue glow, revealing a unique way to unlock it. Inside, they found only a piece of paper with a spell written on it. At first, they didn't understand its meaning, but then, recalling their family's lineage of wizards, they realized they needed to chant the spell together. As the brothers recited the spell, the paper flew up and landed on the floor where it began to burn, leaving a rune mark. They pried open the floorboard and found their family's spell book. Eager to try the spells, they found one that promised invulnerability. Following the instructions, they dripped blood into a cup and drank the concocted potion. After chanting the spell, they felt no different physically. To test the spell's success, Dash placed his hand in fire and discovered that he was indeed invulnerable to the flames. When Killian tried, however, he still got burned. Confused, Killian's body started reacting strangely. He coughed up teeth and his hair began to fall out. Realizing something was wrong, Dash quickly called Ingrid for help. By the time Ingrid arrived, Killian was barely alive. She discovered that the spell was not a protective one, but transferred one person's life force to another. Fortunately, Ingrid arrived in time and found a solution in the family's spell book. In front of the magical circle, she recited the newly found spell, and as the brothers screamed in pain, Killian finally returned to his normal self. Recently, Ingrid has been helping Dash master magic, which has sparked some hormone feelings between them. However, they are both mindful of their past relationship and have chosen not to discuss it. Meanwhile, Victor, who had ventured to the Amazon River a few days ago, returned to the East End today. But as he approached his home, a dark figure attacked him. He was captured by a mysterious man. The next morning, while Wendy was camping outdoors with her officer boyfriend, a mouse suddenly scurried over and climbed onto the officer. Startled by the mouse, Wendy grabbed it and crushed it with her nails before flinging it aside. To her surprise, the mouse was unharmed and quickly ran away. That same mouse then approached the man who had kidnapped Victor the day before and transformed into a woman. It turned out she was a mouse woman, and the man was her twin brother. Both were from a family once part of Asgard, but had been exiled to this world by the royal family. Recently, they discovered that the entrance to Asgard had been opened, so they captured Victor to find out where the key to the entrance was. Despite being tortured, Victor refused to speak. Seeing his resilience, the siblings decided not to waste more time on him and instead approached Fred, threatening him with their father Victor's safety to obtain the key to Asgard entrance. For good measure, the mouse woman then approached Freya, exhaled black smoke, and knocked her unconscious. With 2 hostages in hand, Fred was at a loss and reluctantly agreed to their demands. That evening, he quietly took a spell book from his mother's chest. Joanna discovered him, and upon learning that the Mouse family had kidnapped her husband and daughter, she knew that even if they surrendered the key, the hostages might not be released. Being a seasoned member of the royal family, she was familiar with the Mouse family's tactics. So, Joanna and Fred split up. Fred took the spell book to confront the Mouse Man, claiming the key to Asgard was a spell. However, the Mouse Man, cautious, asked Fred to recite the spell. Fred cunningly recited a summoning spell for snakes, the natural predators of mice. The summoned snakes attacked the Mouse Man, who lamented he just wanted to go home to find his mom, accusing Fred of being worse than his mouse family. Fred retorted that he should never have threatened his family and then broke the Mouse Man's neck, ending his mouse life. On the other side, Joanna located her daughter. Upon seeing the mouse woman, she struck her, sending her flying like a toy, and then freed Freya. The mouse woman, seeing this, opened a magical hourglass and then transformed into a mouse and fled for her shitty life. Just as Freya tried to stand up, Joanna stopped her, revealing that the area was surrounded by magical bombs that would detonate if she moved. As the sand in the hourglass ran out, the bombs would explode. With little time left, Freya urged her mother to leave with her father, believing she could regenerate, but he couldn't. At that moment, Victor suggested that Joanna use a spell to swap their places, allowing the mother and daughter to escape. He argued that his injuries were too severe to survive, and Freya, who hadn't lived this long in centuries, shouldn't die again. The father and daughter argued, leaving Joanna torn. At the last moment, she cast the swapping spell, saving Freya. They bid farewell to Victor, and as they left the cave, the bombs exploded, marking Victor's final departure. After returning home, Joanna was deeply saddened. But little did she know, their troubles were far from over. Mandrake, a mythical beast from the realm of Asgard, was rampaging, killing people around the East End town with reckless abandon. The following night, as Joanna prayed outdoors for her late husband, a monstrous roar echoed from afar. She also found a scale from the creature, which puzzled her as this type of monster was a wild species from Asgard. She wondered why it was here all of a sudden. Fred then explained to her that the king had found a way to tame the mandrake, which had likely come through a portal with him. But the mandrake was immensely powerful, and ordinary means couldn't kill it. Joanna sought the help of an old witch friend who had once specialized in dealing with such monsters at Asgard. Upon arriving at their home, the witch friend immediately asked if they had found the mandrake's mate, leaving everyone puzzled. It turned out that mandrakes could only survive parasitically. They needed a partner to draw energy from, forming a symbiotic bond. Killing one would mean the death of the other. Joanna and her friend then set out to act. Using the scale they had found, they located the mandrake's lair. It was then Joanna discovered the place was littered with Ingrid's personal belongings. The mandrake appeared before them. As the witch friend prepared to shoot, Joanna stopped her. However, the poisoned arrow still struck the monster's arm. At that moment, Ingrid, resting at Dash's house, suffered the same injury. The friend blamed Joanna for her interference. Joanna explained that her daughter Ingrid might be the mandrake's symbiote. Killing it would also mean Ingrid's immediate death, a consequence Joanna could not accept. During their argument, the mandrake took this opportunity to transform into a cloud of smoke and escaped. Meanwhile, Dash was tending to Ingrid's wound when suddenly she was controlled and kicked Dash away. The mandrake reappeared, pressing down on Dash's head and inserting its GPS tentacle into his brain. Joanna and her friends followed the trail of the fleeing mandrake, leading them to Dash's home, where they indeed found the mandrake with Ingrid. The creature then fled again with Ingrid in its grasp. They now needed to find Ingrid quickly and figure out how to sever her symbiotic connection with the mandrake. Their search led them to the library where Ingrid worked. Indeed, they found Ingrid there, already passed out. The friend urged Joanna to quickly stab a spike into her brain. Just as they were about to proceed, Ingrid woke up. Fortunately, Joanna was quick enough to redirect the spike towards Ingrid's head, temporarily restoring her consciousness. Joanna urged her daughter to go back to Wendy while she and her friend stayed behind to confront the mandrake. However, due to the previous attack, the mandrake was on guard, and the poisoned arrows missed their target. As they continued their search in the library, they didn't realize they had fallen into the monster's trap. The mandrake used its tentacles to approach the witch friend from behind, strangling her before injecting poison into her sexy body through her ears. By the time Joanna realized, her witch friend had already collapsed. While Joanna was treating her witch friend, the mandrake extended its tentacles towards her. Both women were powerful witches, and although the mandrake's poison couldn't kill them, it trapped them in a long-lasting illusion. After Ingrid returned home, Wendy and Freya began casting spells on her to sever her symbiotic relationship with the mandrake. Just then, Ingrid felt the mandrake slowly approaching. She knew it was coming for her. In an effort to buy enough time, Wendy stepped forward to block the mandrake, but she underestimated the creature. It extended a tentacle that tripped Wendy. Caught off guard, Wendy tried to sever the tentacle with her high heel, but it was futile. Meanwhile, Freya proceeded with the ritual, setting Ingrid's body ablaze. Once the flames were extinguished, Ingrid would be free from the monster's clutches. Fortunately, the spell was a success, and Ingrid soon woke up. However, Wendy was still in a tug-of-war with the mandrake. Just then, Fred entered with a knife. Wendy, mistaking his intentions, thought he was going to attack her. But Fred swiftly cut off the tentacle wrapped around her leg and stabbed the monster, reciting a spell that turned the mandrake to ashes. Fred's timely intervention convinced Wendy that he had truly changed, bringing the family back together. But things were not that simple. That night, as Fred prepared to bathe, the royal mark on his right shoulder suddenly lit up. He collapsed to the floor, foaming at the mouth, apologizing to his grandfather that he had let him down and he would find another way. Elsewhere, Killian and his wife were playfully roughhousing when suddenly Eva turned around, her beautiful face transforming into that of an old witch. Killian was so startled he nearly exploded. He closed his eyes and upon reopening them, saw Eva had returned to her normal appearance. Thinking it was just a hallucination, Killian paid it no mind. However, unbeknownst to him, Eva was adding a special potion to his tea daily. This potion bewitched him, making him utterly devoted to her. But soon, another incident occurred. After bathing, Killian discovered a message on the bathroom mirror instructing him to check the hidden folder on his phone. Puzzled, he quickly left the bathroom to dismiss Eva. With strange events continuously occurring, he realized something was amiss. He wiped the message from the mirror, and while Eva was out, opened the folder on his phone, finding a video. In the video, a man claimed that Eva was using a spell to control them, making them utterly devoted to her, but importantly, he did not truly love her. His heart belonged to Freya. When Eva returned, Killian confronted her, revealing he knew everything. In anger, Killian smashed a cup to intimidate her. However, Eva, also a witch, was not so easily deterred. She cut her palm with a shard and flung the blood in Killian's face. The next moment, he collapsed in agony. Eva then pulled out her potion, this time increasing the dosage, and fed it to Killian with her finger. Moments later, Killian reverted back to the loving husband she desired. Eva brought her grandmother home that day, but the old lady seemed to be aware of the witchcraft Eva was using on Killian. She advised Eva to hurry up and have a child as she didn't have much time left. Meanwhile, Eva's enchantment on Killian was becoming less effective. That day, when Killian met Freya again, he could no longer suppress his feelings. He pulled Freya aside and confessed that he had been confused lately and had gotten married in a haze, but he was now sure that he truly loved Freya. The two, deeply in love, embraced and kissed passionately using their juicy tongues. That evening, when Killian returned home, he planned to have a serious talk with Ava. Hearing this, Eva quickly realized what was happening and once again increased the dosage of her potion. After dealing with Killian, Ava went to her grandmother's room, only to find that her grandmother was gravely ill and didn't have much time left. The grandmother expressed her determination to hang on until Eva was pregnant. Eva told her not to worry. The grandmother said she loved her and didn't want her to die. Eva replied she would get better and Mom would protect her. It turned out the old lady was actually Eva's daughter. The next day, when Freya saw Killian, she approached him warmly, but Killian coldly pushed her heavy body away and told her he loved his wife very much and asked her not to seek him out anymore. Puzzled by the sudden change, Freya thought the situation was absurd. She still suspected something was off, wondering why Killian, who had professed his love the day before, had changed so drastically. So while Eva was out, Freya sneaked into their house and indeed found a jar of bewitching potion in a drawer. At that moment, the old grandmother discovered her and used witchcraft to scare Freya away, but the excitement of casting spells was too much for her already frail body, and she died on the spot. Later, Freya found Killian and shared her discovery with him. Killian was skeptical, so Freya urged him to confront Eva. When they returned home, they discovered that Eva had turned into a 300-year-old woman. It turned out that Eva was the child of a mortal and a witch, and couldn't have a long life like other witches. She could only maintain her power and beauty by marrying a true wizard and bearing his children. As long as she conceived another child before the previous one died, she could retain her strength and beauty. That's why she had used witchcraft to make Killian fall in love with her, hoping to bear his child to replace the grandma. The old lady was her previous child who had just died, and due to that, her power had completely dissipated. Eva was now at the end of her life. Seeing Eva about to die, Killian felt some compassion. He wanted to cast a spell to help Eva, but the spells they knew were not capable of reversing aging, and so Eva died in his arms. On the other side of the East End town, Fred had made a girlfriend after his arrival. One day after meeting with her, a man in a suit took a seat across from him. When Fred inquired who he was, the man simply extended his hand, causing Fred to collapse in pain on the table, unable to move. With another wave of his hand, the man relieved Fred's agony. It turned out that the man was named Mason, a powerful warlock and the most loyal servant of the King of Asgard. He had come here to assist Fred with a mission. Mason had arrived in this world 400 years ago to monitor everything on behalf of the king, and had once been friends with Joanna in Asgard. Despite this, Fred insisted he didn't need Mason's help, and that he would find a suitable host for the king himself. However, Mason revealed that he had recently killed Mandrake, the most suitable soul for the king, but Fred argued that he had no choice as Mandrake had gone out of control, killing people around the East End town. Mason's visit was intended to help Fred complete his mission, starting with suppressing his mother Joanna's magic, as she was too powerful and could potentially thwart their plans. Therefore, he instructed Fred to mix a potion into Joanna's wine. That evening, as Mason visited Joanna's home, Fred had the opportunity to serve his mother a drink. He poured the potion into the wine glass, followed by red wine. However, during a toast, Fred couldn't bring himself to harm his mother and shattered her glass with his own. Mason later confronted him about this, warning that the king had instructed him to use any means necessary if Fred did not cooperate. Fred was unfazed, claiming that his grandfather's soul was within him and their plans would fail without him. Mason then attempted to extract the king's soul with a dagger, but was repelled by a powerful force, realizing he couldn't achieve it. He then magically subdued Fred, warning him to think of another way to fulfill their mission without tricks. In the following days, they captured townspeople to mark them with the king's symbol, but none proved suitable as hosts. After another failure, Mason didn't hesitate to kill the captured individual. He soon realized this method was wrong, as the captives were too frightened, their souls preoccupied with survival rather than accepting the ritual. They then decided to find someone who trusted Fred. The next night, when Fred met Mason again, he suggested they halt their actions for the evening. After Mason initially subdued him with a spell, Fred explained that continuing to kill would soon attract unwanted attention. Mason released him and asked for his plan, at which point Fred unexpectedly stabbed Mason in the heart with a dagger concealed in his sleeve. Fred thought he had resolved everything and went to celebrate with his girlfriend at a bar, but Mason, undeterred by such tactics, reappeared and distracted his girlfriend. He then suggested that since they needed someone Fred trusted, his girlfriend would be the ideal candidate. He urged Fred to quickly prepare her as the king's vessel. Back home, Fred suggested playing a little game with his girlfriend, blindfolding her and numbing her senses with a magical potion before marking her with the king's symbol. At the final step, however, Fred hesitated and used witchcraft to heal her wounds, once again failing to complete the task, which greatly angered Mason, who unleashed his fury on Fred. The next morning, battered and bruised, Fred made his way home. Seeing his condition, Joanna quickly helped him to the couch and used her witchcraft to heal his wounds. It was then that Fred revealed the truth. After succumbing to darkness, the king's body had become extremely frail, to the point where he could no longer pass through the portal. Consequently, he sought to find a new body through possession. While they were devising a plan to handle the situation, Mason had already identified his target. He had kidnapped Wendy's officer boyfriend, using her life to coerce the officer. Without hesitation, the officer agreed to sacrifice himself, his fearless spirit making him the perfect host. To counter Mason, Joanna retrieved a venomous scorpion she hadn't used in centuries. A single sting from it could paralyze a person, and a second would be lethal. The challenge now was locating Mason. Hence, using their twin bond, Fred and Freya held hands and thought of a person's name, which transported their consciousness to that person's location. They found Mason in an abandoned school, where he had also taken the officer captive. They quickly returned and informed Joanna and Wendy of the officer's abduction. Immediately afterward, they headed to the school where Mason was. Meanwhile, Mason had already marked the officer with the king's symbol, but discovered that the officer also couldn't withstand the king's soul. Just as he was about to leave, the officer suddenly regained his strength, and his wounds healed instantly. The officer was indeed the body they had been searching for. As Joanna and Wendy arrived at the school gates, they blasted them open with a single palm strike. However, upon reaching the classroom, they found that Mason had already left with the officer, and he was moving on to his next step. Knowing that Fred would no longer cooperate in releasing the king's soul, Mason headed to the library where he kidnapped Ingrid and Freya. He then went to Fred's house but couldn't find him. At that moment, a venomous scorpion crawled onto Mason's shoulder and stung his neck, causing him to collapse instantly. Furious, Fred shoved the entire scorpion into Mason's mouth, declaring that he would never let him or the king harm his family again. He vowed to kill the master and then himself, ensuring that the king would never reach this world. As Mason lay dying, he mentioned that he had left a gift for Fred in the garden. At that moment, Wendy and Joanna returned home. Heartbroken, Fred walked in from the garden and merely said he was sorry. When Joanna reached the garden, she was struck dumb by the horrifying scene before her. Freya and Ingrid had been gruesomely hanged from a tree. No matter how hard she tried, the pain would repeatedly pierce her heart. Joanna, tears streaming down her face, cried out that she couldn't take this anymore. The next day, she prepared her daughter's bodies for burial. Meanwhile, Killian came to the house looking for Freya. Before Wendy could explain, he burst into the living room and saw Freya's body. The shock was too much for him to handle. He kept dialing Freya's phone over and over, just to hear her voicemail greeting. Of course, Joanna was the most devastated. Over the centuries, she had endured the agony of outliving her children countless times. Now, she could no longer cry out loud. She picked up a knife, sat in the bathtub, and slit both her arms, letting the blood fill the tub. It was then that her sister found Joanna barely alive. She quickly carried her to bed and used magic to heal her wounds. When Joanna woke up, she angrily scolded her sister, saying she had had enough of this life and questioned why she was saved. To prevent any further rash actions, Wendy locked Joanna in her room, then went to find Fred at the bar. Wendy came up with an idea. She asked Fred to complete a ritual that would bring the king into this world, the king of Asgard, with enough magic to revive Freya and Ingrid without causing any other harm. Although resurrecting the king might plunge them into another crisis, they had no other options. So they went to the abandoned school building. Sure enough, Mason was not dead and had been waiting for Fred. Wendy didn't waste time talking and asked him to start the ritual immediately. After setting up the magic circle, Mason began chanting the spell. The mark on Fred's left shoulder suddenly lit up, and the king's soul left his body, circled overhead, and then entered the officer's body nearby. Wendy helped the officer up, and the officer, now looking like the king, said hello to his daughter. He then kicked Mason away and told him not to hurt his granddaughter without his permission. When they returned home, Joanna saw their father and was furious. She couldn't accept that her father and his servant Mason were responsible for killing her two daughters. It was hard to believe that this wasn't the king's doing, but the king insisted that he had returned for a family reunion and that if he had wanted to kill someone, he had countless ways to do it. Then, using a powerful spell, he brought the two dead daughters back to life, stating his intention to take them home and rebuild their family. Fred also tried to persuade his mother to return to Asgard and live together in harmony. Joanna didn't say much outwardly, but she no longer trusted a word the king said. In the evening, she secretly woke her sister and two daughters, pulled out a magic key from a drawer, and told them they were going back in time. They weren't going to change anything, but to retrieve something. Joanna then opened the portal and let them all go through. However, at the last moment, Ingrid chose to stay. They arrived 200 years in the past, where Joanna sought an artifact capable of defeating the king. Back then, Freya had accidentally summoned a malevolent spirit using her magic, which possessed her. Many townspeople perished at her hands, and even Joanna was unable to rid her daughter of this evil spirit. She sought the help of a mysterious sorcerer who produced a magical box capable of absorbing souls and banishing them to hell. However, the drawback was that using the artifact would also extract Freya's soul, leading to her death. Despite her reluctance, Joanna used the artifact at a crucial moment, removing the spirit from Freya's body, effectively killing her own daughter. Joanna's reason for returning 200 years was to retrieve this artifact because after she had used it to absorb Freya's soul, a person who looked exactly like her emerged from the woods, claiming she needed the soul-absorbing artifact. It was only days ago that Joanna realized it had been her future self who came to take the artifact. Now she aimed to complete the cycle, use the artifact to send the king to hell, and they had to return to their original world before midnight, or they would vanish forever. Meanwhile, Ingrid's decision to stay pleased the king, who praised her as his favorite granddaughter. However, Ingrid had not betrayed her mother. She chose to stay to covertly find a way to defeat the king, having recently discovered many methods in the family diaries of Dash to defeat a powerful entity. Dash, delighted to see Ingrid alive, tried to call Killian to tell him Freya was still alive. But heartbroken, Killian did not answer the call. The day after Freya's death, he had sought out a warlock who had once worked with Eva. Killian expressed his desire to resurrect his beloved Freya. The warlock warned him that resurrection required a dreadful price, a life for a life. He then provided Killian with a potion that would end his life and bring Freya back. As Dash called, Killian drank the potion. Soon after, he collapsed, feeling dizzy and losing consciousness. In his dreams, Killian saw Freya, who surprisingly told him she was alive. When she learned that Killian had drunk the potion for her sake, she urged him to wake up and call Ingrid. After waking from the dream, Killian called Ingrid, who eventually found him and brought a potion to alleviate the poison's effects. Though it couldn't cure him completely, regular doses might keep him alive until they found a cure. After returning home, Ingrid was stopped by the king. It turned out he knew about her meeting with Dash and had also guessed her intentions. Without wasting words, the king unleashed an energy wave and bound Ingrid with vines. Regardless of whether Ingrid submitted to him or not, he had no intention of letting her die. From the beginning, his goal had been to drain their magical powers. While the king and Ingrid were talking, Fred stealthily approached from behind, intending to ambush him. However, the old are often crafty. The king turned around and released a light wave, causing Fred's dagger to end up stabbing himself instead. The king looked disdainfully at the two before turning and walking away. When Fred recovered from his unconscious state, he used magic to heal his wound. Then, Ingrid took him away and shared her plan. Upon arriving at Dash's home, they learned that the diary had suddenly disappeared. Fortunately, Dash had read through all the diaries before, and although he did not understand everything, Fred suggested that he could use witchcraft to extract the memories. This way, they could still find a way to defeat the king. Fred handled the memory extraction while Ingrid took charge of transcribing. Together, they successfully reconstructed the content of the diaries. Meanwhile, the king was well aware that his daughter had returned to the past to find a way to defeat him. For safety, he sent Mason back in time to stop Joanna's actions. Joanna was waiting for her past self to kill her daughter. Then she emerged from the woods, took the artifact as she remembered, and planned to meet her sister and daughter. However, she encountered Mason, who snatched the artifact from her hands with a gesture. Joanna fired a light wave at Mason, but he managed to escape. Just when Joanna felt defeated, Mason reappeared before her, surprisingly proposing a partnership. If they joined forces, he claimed the king would stand no chance. It turned out that Mason had long harbored feelings for Joanna, but she declared she would rather die than collude with him. This infuriated Mason. Using a strand of Joanna's hair he had obtained earlier, he crafted a puppet and controlled her. The vile Mason intended to subdue Joanna in such a disgusting manner. Already controlled by the puppet, she was further weakened by a magical potion he administered, leaving her unable to resist. Wendy and Freya had been waiting by the portal, but as time ticked by, there was still no sign of Joanna. Even the portal itself had vanished. In a moment of quick thinking, Wendy sought out the wizard who had initially created the portal. She convinced him to send a message 200 years into the future, telling a woman named Ingrid to reopen the portal of time. Meanwhile, 200 years later, Ingrid received the wizard's message, indicating that the wizard was truly dedicated to his craft. On the other side, Wendy transformed into a cat and tracked Joanna down by scent. She saw Mason about to harm her sister and promptly knocked him out cold with a stick. They grabbed the artifact and rushed towards the portal, just as Ingrid reopened the time portal from the other side. However, the situation took a turn for the worse when Mason regained consciousness and pursued them relentlessly. During the fast and furious chase, the artifact was knocked from their hands and shattered on the ground. Wendy, prioritizing their safety, hurried through the portal back to their original world. Though they escaped without harm, the artifact meant to confront the king was lost. Before they could even speak, the lights in Dash's house suddenly went out. When they came back on, Wendy had vanished, showing that the king had taken her. At that moment, Ingrid revealed her discovery from the Dash family diaries, a spell to defeat the king. However, the spell required both sisters, their mother, and Wendy to cast it together. They immediately set off for home, leaving Fred at Dash's house. The witch family made a powerful return. Joanna began the spell, followed by Ingrid and Freya. Then, Joanna urged Wendy to chant the incantation. But at that moment, Wendy was trapped within a magical circle. Joanna broke the circle with her other hand, and Wendy completed the incantation. Together, they unleashed their power. Because of that, the king was finally defeated after their relentless attack, his soul completely dispersed. Since the great villain was dead, the possessed officer was also lifeless. In the aftermath, Freya and Ingrid went to find Killian, who had also stopped breathing. Distraught, Freya kissed Killian, and just then, a golden light shone. A miraculous scene unfolded as Killian came back to life, perhaps a testament to the power of true love. While there were moments of joy, Wendy was consumed with guilt over the officer's death. She believed that had it not been for her, her boyfriend would never have become a vessel for the king. Determined to set things right, Wendy traded her last life for the officer's. The officer awoke, but Wendy had left this world forever. Joanna, holding her sister, wept profusely like an old baby. With that, the drama finally came to a close.